Shanah Tovah. It's such a pleasure to be here with you at Beth El Temple, celebrating my first Rosh Hashanah with you. Whether you're here in the sanctuary, joining on live stream, or whether you are among those who I celebrated with earlier today outside in the Grove. Even if this isn't exactly the first Rosh Hashanah that we had hoped for together, it's such a gift to be in this vibrant and caring, welcoming community. As we ring in our first New Year together, I find myself looking forward to all the other firsts we will be able to celebrate. Our first time celebrating other holidays and life cycle events. Our first opportunities to learn together in Sulam or ring in Shabbat with Shababa. Our first moments of connecting deeply over learning or conversation, and so much more. As I think about these firsts, I also find myself reflecting on the power of ritualizing firsts. We know this intuitively. It's why first day of school pictures are so beloved. The rabbis of the Talmud also recognized this 2,000 years ago when they taught, one who builds a new house or buys new things such as dishes, tools, or clothing should say the blessing, Shehecheyanu, v'kiyamanu, v'hegiyanu lazaman hazeh. Blessed is the one who causes us to be alive and sustains us and has enabled us to arrive in this moment. We are similarly encouraged to recite this blessing upon celebrating holiday rituals, such as sounding the shofar, as we did this morning, life cycle events, or even upon eating a seasonal fruit for the first time in a year. I've always appreciated the Shehecheyanu blessing for the way that it magnifies the thrill of a new beginning or the joy of returning to something special. But I don't think I ever truly appreciated the significance of this blessing until this past Purim. In many ways, Purim felt like the anniversary of the pandemic. At my previous synagogue, Purim in 2020 was the last big in-person event, which made this past Purim the one-year marker on the Jewish calendar of pandemic life. 1 year of praying via Zoom and live stream, of sheltering in our homes, of suddenly being cut off from hugs and handshakes and visits with those we love. It was also a time of great hope. A vaccine was available, and every day infection rates declined as more and more people became inoculated. We could imagine a time when things would be better. As we sat down to our devices for a virtual Purim celebration, the reader chanted the blessings over Megillat Esther, followed by the Shehecheyanu. Blessed are you, Lord our God, sovereign of time and space, Shehecheyanu, who causes us to be alive, v'kiyamanu, who sustains us, v'hegiyanu, and has enabled us to arrive at this moment. I had heard these words hundreds, if not thousands of times before, but this time, the words landed deeply in my soul and cracked my heart open. As I heard the words chanted over Zoom that Purim evening, I was brought to tears as I looked at a screen filled with faces of people whose lives I had learned not to take for granted. People who had been granted life in the past year. In that moment, I realized what I had not understood before. The Shehecheyanu is not simply a blessing thanking God for reaching special occasions. It is a blessing that expresses profound gratitude for our continued existence, and perhaps even a roadmap for navigating life when our very survival is something for which we are grateful. Shehechianu. Our Machzor translates this as granting us life. And while that translation isn't wrong, I now wonder if it is too proper. What if this blessing was meant to articulate something much more raw? What if this is really a blessing, thanking God to allow us to survive? After all, the rabbis who composed this blessing some 2,000 years ago lived in a world where death was much more a part of life, where mortality rates were significantly higher, life expectancy lower. Of course, the rabbis would compose a blessing thanking God for survival. And survive another year we have. As we ring in this new year, I find myself again feeling the full weight of these words. Baruch shehechianu, blessed is the one who has allowed us to survive. Yes, us, all of us, to see 5782. This is not to ignore the challenges we have overcome or the losses we have endured. On the contrary, I believe the Shehechianu is a recognition of the fragility of life, a profound expression of blessing and gratitude that comes from confronting loss and grief and all that it took for us to survive, from confronting mortality, that of our own and others, and from that place, accessing a deep well of gratitude for our continued existence. I am grateful for our survival. Throughout the early stages of the pandemic, I thought it was all I needed. When close friends would ask how I was doing, I told them I felt like I was in survival mode. And that was okay, because what really could one expect more than that in navigating pandemic life? But as the year unfolded, I started to realize what the rabbis who composed this blessing had been trying to teach us all along. That mere survival is not enough. Maybe it is in the short term, but as Rabbi Rosen spoke about yesterday, we also need to be able to endure the long haul. To survive with a sense of wholeness, we need shehechianu, gratitude for our survival, to be followed by v'kiyamanu, gratitude for being sustained. But what does it mean to be sustained? What sustains us? And what sustained the rabbis who, in their great wisdom, knew that mere survival was not enough? That which sustains us has to be beyond that which we need for our basic survival. Otherwise, to say shehechianu and v'kiyamanu would be repetitive. It also has to be more than simply what makes us happy, since, as journalist Julia Baird wrote in her memoir, Phosphorescence, knowing what makes us happy is all very well if you are healthy, fit, and strong, or in a harmonious relationship, certain about the future. But how do we survive, stay alive, or even bloom when the world goes dark? When we are, for instance, overwhelmed by illness or heartbreak, loss or pain? Is it possible to experience what monk David Steindl-Rast calls the kind of happiness that doesn't depend on what happens? How do we find, nurture, and carry our own inner living light, as Baird phrased it? How do we sustain ourselves so that when we are confronted with the fragility of life, we are not merely surviving, but can genuinely say, shehechianu v'kiyamanu? As I contemplated these questions, two images from our tradition emerged. The first is a text from the Talmud, which tells of Rabbi Yochanan who sees one of his students suffering. He goes to his student and says, Havli yadech, give me your hand. So the student gave him his hand, and he raised him up. Literally, he sustained him. Sometime later, Rabbi Yochanan, the very one who raised his student in the previous story, is suffering. So Rabbi Hanina comes to him. And the story essentially repeats itself, but now Rabbi Yochanan is in the reverse position. Rabbi Hanina says to Rabbi Yochanan, "Give me your hand," and Rabbi Yochanan gives him his hand. Rabbi Hanina raises him up. The narrator interrupts the story to ask, why did Rabbi Yochanan need someone else to raise him up? If he was capable of raising up his student in the first story, why couldn't he raise himself up when he was the one suffering? And the answer? Ein chavush matir atzmo. A prisoner cannot free oneself. In other words, no matter how strong we might be, when we are bound up in the depths of suffering, we have to rely on others to be sustained. This is a text that explicitly confronts the question, how can we be sustained amidst suffering? And a clear answer emerges. What sustains us is each other. In both vignettes, the person suffering was not sustained until someone else reached out their hand. Perhaps the most profound line of this text is, Ein chavush matir atzmo, one bound up in the depths of suffering cannot free themselves. Though Rabbi Yochanan could raise others up, he could not raise himself. He could not sustain himself. He needed someone else, and we need someone else. Perhaps a teacher or colleague, as in these stories, or perhaps a friend, a family member, someone in our community, or even a kind stranger, to reach out a hand, whether literal or metaphorical. We need others to be present with us, to reach out to us, to connect, to raise us up. As I continued to consider what sustains us, the other image from Jewish tradition that came to mind was a line from our prayers. In Ashrei and the Amidah, we refer to God as Somech Nofalim. God is the supporter of those who are falling. God, who could refer to a divine being or could refer to a sense of something greater than us, or our values that guide our lives, that sustains us, just as others do. Reaching out, showing up for each other, connection with other human beings, with the divine, with something beyond ourselves. This was what sustained the rabbis. And what sustains us? Curious, I asked on Facebook, what sustains you? And the answers were beautiful in their simplicity. Family, friends, community, pets, encounters with kind strangers, being immersed in nature, music, art, being creative, learning, growing a garden, the joy of a child, belly laughs, deep conversations, doing for others, belief in the goodness of humanity, gratitude, hope. In many ways, the same things that sustained the rabbis, reaching out beyond ourselves, connecting to others, and to something greater than any individual can ever be. In reading your answers, I was reminded of the words of the great poet Yehuda Amichai, who said about hope, "Hopeful is too big a word. I have cut it down into little hopes. One peaceful day with a breeze, a dish in a restaurant, buying vegetables from a woman in the old city. My hopes are not like big stones, but little stones ground up and made into cement that will support a whole house. Maybe the same is true of what sustains us. Maybe we should not look for one grand gesture to sustain us, but rather for little moments of sustenance that can join together to support a whole house. Maybe the things that sustain us are already within our reach. We simply need to tap into these resources so that we can say with integrity, Baruch Shekiyamanu, blessed is the one who sustains us. V'hegiyanu lazman hazeh, and allows us to arrive at this moment. I've been thinking a lot about arriving recently. Since I'm new to the area, I've been relying heavily on Google Maps to get around. Enter my desired destination, plug my phone into my car, and voila, customized road map. And the best part is that when I complete my trip, my phone always tells me, you have arrived at your destination. Except for when I drive my kid to school. For whatever reason, my phone never thinks I've arrived. It always thinks I'm a couple minutes away still. As far as Google Maps is concerned, I have never arrived at my destination. Except that I did get to where I needed to be. I know it, my kid knows it, the teachers know it. What does it matter that I didn't arrive at my originally intended destination? Maybe that is the lesson of declaring V'hegiyanu lazman hazeh, for enabling us to arrive at this moment. Maybe the wisdom of this blessing is in feeling a sense of arrival in whatever moment we are in right now, even if we haven't arrived at the place of our originally intended destination. Because we have arrived at this moment, and there is so much to be grateful for. When I pictured my first high holidays with you, I had hoped we would all be able to safely join together in person with the pandemic essentially behind us. This is not the destination I had originally intended. And yet, I am grateful to be here with you, whether you are joining in person or remotely. Grateful to be in a community that is able to connect despite the pandemic. Grateful because I now have the opportunity to support you as we navigate this together. Grateful to be able to dream up new ways of connecting, celebrating, learning, and supporting each other. Grateful to be present, bazman hazeh, in this moment, even if it is not the moment I had envisioned. Perhaps this is what the psalmist meant when he wrote the words we recite in Hallel, Zeh hayom asa Adonai, this is the day that God has made, regardless of which day it is, whether it is a good day or a bad day, a momentous occasion or an everyday. Nagila v'nismecha vo, therefore let us be glad and feel a deep sense of joy in it. Perhaps the challenge of Shehachianu is to feel as if we have arrived, even if we are not where we intended to be. We have arrived because we have survived and sustained ourselves in the process. And that is always reason to be grateful. As we enter the year 5782, not knowing what the new year will bring, I want to encourage us to lean into the wisdom of Shehachianu, to understand this blessing not only as a celebration upon reaching momentous occasions or having new experiences, but as an expression of profound gratitude for our survival, a reminder that we need something beyond mere survival to sustain us, and an appreciation for the moment we are in, regardless of where we might want to be. As we enter this new year together, I invite you to take a moment. Close your eyes if you'd like. Feel your heart beat. Feel the breath of life flow in and out of your lungs and be grateful for your survival. Recognize that life is about more than survival. Ask yourself, what sustains me? Commit to carving out moments to access the sustaining forces in your life. And then feel a sense of arrival, of wholeness in the moment that we are in right now.